So Britain stands alone. France has fallen. Most of mainland Europe has fallen. The Channel Islands, the Nazis are there. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, we're in the shit. How did we manage to get out of this situation?
Well, we get out of it because Germany's not as good as they seem at the beginning of the war with the Blitzkrieg years, because Germany does have this shortage of supplies and access to the world's oceans, and because Britain is is an island nation with the world's largest navy and the world's largest merchant fleet and access to over 80% of the world's merchant shipping, and those are incalculable advantages. And also, in the summer of 1940, it has the world's first fully coordinated and only air defense system. So in the past, what's happened is the Luftwaffe has been able to choose when it comes over and destroys people's airfields and aircraft on the ground, because its enemies don't know when they're coming. But now we do. Britain does know when it's coming. It can see, and it can prepare for it. So A, it can take off make sure its aircraft aren't on the airfield when the Germans come a-calling. And secondly, they can attack them, and they can manipulate them, and they can control them from the ground so that they're best placed to attack the Germans. And you know, it's often said that the Battle of Britain is a close run finish. It's absolutely no such thing. You know, the Germans are absolutely annihilated. Well, they're not annihilated, but they're very, very badly beaten. You know, in the whole of the Battle of Britain, they destroy, put out of action 1 out of 138 airfields for more than 48 hours.
Wow.
You know, that is not a good effort, you know, when they're used to just coming over and just destroying everything in sight. So they don't get very far, and they don't even destroy the RAF, not even close. Their intelligence is terrible. The tactics are appalling. They switch to bombing London, which is catastrophic and horrendous. And the Blitz is the first time ever that cities of one country have a sustained aerial bombardment. I mean, it's never happened before. You know, Rotterdam's been hit, Warsaw's been hit, but not in a sustained way that lasts 7 months. So this is all kind of, you know, new turf. But Britain shows that it can take it. But my point is, they haven't even got to the Navy. You know, they haven't even put a ship in the water yet. And, you know, you've got to transfer an army to do an invasion. Well, they haven't got landing craft. There aren't any landing craft. Landing craft haven't been invented at that point. There's no Higgins boat or landing ship or anything. So how are they going to do this? Well, they're doing it in river barges, which they've taken from the Rhine, which is absolutely scuppering their internal trade and industry, because they've got no means of movement. And they haven't got enough motorised barges anyway. So the idea is one motorised barge tows the other 2. I mean, can you imagine? How's that going to work when you actually hit the beach? I mean, it's just absolutely bonkers. And even if they had got there, then you know, they'd have been absolutely hammered by, you know, millions of people in uniform, you know, firing at them. So you know, Operation Sea Lion, which is the proposed invasion of Britain, has no chance, and it's not going to happen, and it doesn't happen. It's very, very difficult to do an amphibious invasion when you haven't had years of preparation for it. What that does do is it gives Britain the understanding that any future, once it's isolated, any future offensive operations are going to have to be amphibious by their very nature. So it does start creating landing craft, and so does the United States at the same time. You know, at the same time that France is surrendering and Britain is kind of taking its navy back from its army back from Dunkirk in late May, early June 1940. Roosevelt is going, you know, I need to do this amazing political volte-face. I need to massively rearm, even though I got into power in the election of 1932 on an isolationist ticket and anti-militarism. We now need to change all that. And you know, we don't have the time or space to go into how he does that, but he does that very, very effectively, so that by the time that America comes into the war in December 1941 actively, it has become the arsenal of democracy. But it goes from kind of, you know, nothing to the huge armed forces and huge sort of armaments factories that develops in very, very quick order. You know, it's an astonishing turnaround. But, you know, Britain is doing exactly the same. I mean, Britain produces 132,500 aircraft in the Second World War. You know, Germany produces maybe 80,000. United States creates something like over 315,000 aircraft in the Second World War. 83,000 aircraft in 1943 alone. I mean, these are astronomical figures. You know, 83,000 aircraft is 1,000 more than the capacity of Twickenham Stadium, for example. Wow. You know, imagine what that looks like in terms of actual aircraft. I mean, it is absolutely incredible. But in 1939, September 1939, the USA has the 19th largest army in the world of about 188,000, which is tiny by 1930 standards, sandwiched between Portugal and Uruguay. So, to go from that to kind of 6.5 million people in uniform by 1945 is going some. And what the United States realised, and what Britain realised, is that mass will win. If you don't lose in the initial strike, Germany simply doesn't have the resources to win. And I would say, on balance, Britain and America, and Britain start off with, fight a very pragmatic war. They use the resources to the best of their ability. Britain very early on realizes that the Battle of the Atlantic is the battleground which is going to be the most important in the entire war, and it is, because through the Atlantic, all the shipping passes, whether it's going supplies to the Soviet Union, Arctic convoys and all the rest of it, or to Middle East, or to Europe, or obviously supplying Britain. So the Atlantic is absolutely crucial. That is where the bulk of Britain's research and development goes into. By May 1941, so comparatively early in the war, Britain gets to a point where it is not going to lose the Battle of the Atlantic. It doesn't mean to say it's won it by that point. The victory in the Battle of the Atlantic comes in May 1943, so 2 years later. But it's got to the point where it's not going to lose. And I would argue that by the end of 1941, Nazi Germany is already finished, which is obviously a lot earlier than most people would think. But just think about this. So in the middle of June 1941, Nazi Germany has one enemy, albeit Britain. It's Britain plus Dominion and Empire, but it only has one enemy. Fast forward 6 months to the middle of December 1941. Has three enemies. Has the United States of America, has the USSR, and it has Great Britain plus Empire. It's not going to win.
And it's lost the Battle of Moscow, which was crucial as well, right by that point. Well, that was massive. I think that it's the first time they really lost a lot of men. And their momentum was stopped. They didn't capture Moscow.
Well, the truth is Operation Barbarossa, which is the German battle plan for the invasion of the Soviet Union, is terrible. It's a really bad plan. It's completely undercooked. They don't have remotely enough to do what they're trying to do. They're attacking on three giant thrusts over a kind of vast space. They simply do not have the mechanization, the oil, the infrastructure to be able to carry it out. The only reason they have the success they do is because the Red Army is even worse. And this is because of the huge purges that have taken place in the 1930s, where 22,500 Red Army officers have been executed or imprisoned, including 3 out of 5 marshals and I think 15 army commanders. I mean, they are terrible. And actually, the Red Army continues to be very, very badly led throughout the Second World War. They've always been incredibly expensive in manpower, and nothing's changed in the Second World War. Any Soviet, any Russian leaders won't like me for saying this, but the encirclement of Stalingrad, the encirclement of the German Sixth Army, which is such a kind of, an important moment in the Second World War. While it's not Germany's biggest defeat, it is unquestionably a big turning point. That only happens thanks to 75,000, United States vehicles that Marshal Zhukov is able to use for Operation Uranus. So, you can't do the encirclement unless you can move fast. The only reason you can move fast is with all that mechanization. Where's the mechanization come from? It comes from the United. It comes from Lend-Lease. So, there's absolutely no question that while more blood is spilled on the Eastern Front, that is absolutely irrefutable. There's no question about it. And the sacrifice of the Soviet Union, particularly in terms of civilian deaths rather than military deaths, is absolutely horrific. And military deaths is also horrific. Military deaths are really, to a large extent, result of military inefficiency. Just take this for example. Final Battle of Berlin, which is launched on the 16th of April 1945, they're coming up against 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 60-year-olds, Volkssturm, basic home guard. Yes, a handful of veterans and Waffen-SS types and all the rest of it, but a massively, horrifically depleted German armed forces, which shouldn't be able to put up much of a shot against anyone. Against them, they've got thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of artillery pieces, something like 41,000 artillery pieces, millions of men. And yet, in little over 2 weeks, they managed to lose over 900,000 casualties. That doesn't strike me as an army that really knows what it's doing very much. And the reason they're all being killed is because their commanders are incredibly reckless with the lives of their men, and they're very undertrained. So they're just using mass and bulk to overwhelm the enemy, but that comes at a huge cost. Whereas the Western allies are very conservative with men's lives, and yes, they're a bit more cautious, and yes, that means they might take a little bit longer to do something. But the bottom line is what they're using steel, not our flesh, to do a lot of the hard yards. In other words, they're using their global reach, they're using industrialization, mechanization, modern technology to do a lot of the hard yards so that the number of men in the firing line is kept to an absolute minimum. This is why only, of Allied armies, American, Canadian, British armies operating in the European theatre of operations, for example, only around 14% are infantry, only 8% are in tanks, of which that 8% in a tank unit, only about 48% are actually in tanks. The rest are support troops supporting those tanks. 22% are artillery, 43% are service corps. And what that tells you is that this is a very, very heavily material-based, heavily industrial-backed armed forces, which is all the more efficient and effective as a result of that.